Okay.
Yes, we are seeing.
I have custom made this talk because Harish gave me an advance of almost a year. So this talk is exclusively for the Gut Club and for the intellectual capacity that is immeasurable that is present in the audience. So I've tried my best to accommodate my talk according to the audience here. I believe what makes us people of science is the ability to constantly adapt our knowledge and update our knowledge and adapt. And that's really what makes us people of science. But what I've seen in the past 2 years and before that, when I worked on multiple other public health topics such as road safety, snake bite, fire safety, and noise pollution, so many other public health topics that I've worked on. While looking at evidence, while looking at research papers, I've seen that a lot of what we do is perhaps not right. And I think it can be summarized as missing the forest for the trees. And this basically means that if you look at a tree so closely, you might miss the forest around it, and you might think the whole world is a tree. But if you take a couple of steps back, we start seeing the big picture. I see that every day with analysis of the pandemic. And I'll just direct you to my Twitter account just to show you what I mean. This is my Twitter account, which has over 10,000 tweets on the pandemic. This is something I created. I figured out very early that unless you have an equal amount of knowledge in multiple domains, your knowledge, your conclusions will be skewed in one direction or the other. So we have people who are experts in economics talking about it. We have people who are statisticians, data crunchers talking about pandemic, making predictions. We have epidemiologists, we have immunologists, and we have people who work in the lab. They all have different perspectives of the pandemic. If you look closely, they all have different perspectives. It's like the 5 blind men and the 5 blind people who saw the elephant. They all feel differently about it. And unfortunately, the pandemic is now being governed by data crunchers who are basically journalists who have no medical background whatsoever, and they claim to see the future, and that is a danger that we are in. So back to my slides here. So we are missing the forest for the trees unless we have an equal knowledge of all the aspects of science, and also a lot of ethics is involved in the pandemic as well. So missing the forest for the trees is my biggest message. Whatever science we learn in the pandemic, or snake bite, or road accident, I think looking at the big picture is important. This is an example of the big picture which nobody has been seeing. This is if you Google COVID cases in South Africa, you'll see this. All you have to do is to take a scale and measure the distance between the peaks of the pandemic. Now, I did this a few weeks ago, so the peak of the 4th wave is here. The difference between the peaks of each wave is exactly 6 months. Now, that tells us something. I don't know what it is, but it tells us something. It tells us something which we don't hear about. We don't hear these things discussed on television or in articles. There are things beyond what we know or perhaps what we comprehend. Why is this thing coming in the same community every 6 months? Do other diseases do this? That is what I meant by saying forest for the trees. Let's look at the forest here. This is again my Twitter, one of my tweets from I think maybe a month ago. Many infectious diseases have a cyclical pattern which varies between continents. Reasons are multiple. In fact, while reading about the pandemic, I place a lot of faith in articles that were written before the pandemic because they were not biased. Those people didn't know that COVID-19 is going to come. So I think they were a little bit more, let's say, balanced and honest. So this is one such article. It's from the Journal of Epidemiology and Infection, 1989. I was still in medical college. I'll take you through the graphs. This is the cyclical pattern of parainfluenza 1, parainfluenza 2, and 3. It's like a it's like clockwork. This is rotavirus, just like a metronome. And if you see you can also see rubella and parvovirus. So many viruses. The COVID-19 is not the first virus with the cyclical pattern. So what we need to understand is that this is a new disease, which is a cyclical disease. And it's going to be here. It's going to stay here. And not all countries are going to have this exact 6-month pattern. For example, India's pattern is similar to Indonesia. So it's possible that there are some other aspects of it. For example, weather conditions, the humidity, people's behavior, festivals, immunity levels. There's so many factors that go into it. So we need to keep an open mind. And one of the lessons I learned very early in science is this: I must respect the unknown. So I have a lot of respect for what is not known. I believe that most of knowledge is not invented yet. So we are looking at just the fringe of the knowledge. But we believe that we know everything, unfortunately, and that's something we should stay away from. So this is the neurological aspect of it. In fact, in during MD medicine, my favorite subject was neurology. And for some reason, I did not take it up. So here we have a very important distinction when we are scientists. We must know the difference between science and belief. And sometimes the distinction between the two is so minimal that they merge. But the neurology doesn't merge. Belief is by the limbic system, which is illustrated here, and science is dealt with almost exclusively by our frontal lobe, which is really what makes us different from other members of the animal kingdom. So this is a distinction. So science is impartial. It's about numbers, and if we are proven wrong, it's perfectly fine. And I'll come to that. Whereas belief is different. Belief is formed. It's automatic. You can't control it. It's involuntary. You can't change it, which is why when people mix the two, you can see so many conflicts happening. I think that in communication, I also teach communication. I happen to be the state IMA communication skills convener for doctors. So when we communicate with doctors or with patients or other people or with society, I think if we know the distinction, we'll be able to do a better job. So look at this example. Beware of this particular logo. It's called Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. So very impressive looking names are there. There are so many such apparent societies. They're all there to push one agenda, that is basically they want to sell pills in the guise of the pandemic. And this is one such pill which is a worldwide hit. It's called ivermectin, good for worms, particularly for dogs. It's good. I give my dogs ivermectin once in a while for their fleas. And as gastroenterologists, we prescribe that once in a while when it's indicated. But all over the world, there's a belief. See, this belief has gone into ivermectin. There's a belief that there's a secret agency, there's a secret force headed by Bill Gates and other hidden rich people who had created the pandemic and they're trying to profit from it. So that's a belief. It is this belief that partially drives vaccine resistance in some Western nations. And it is the same belief that makes them turn into unproven remedies like ivermectin. Unless we know the science, unless we know the biology of it, we will not be able to counter it. And that's again really where United States went wrong. So this is a beautiful graph of what is called confirmation bias, which I've heard Dr. Narendranath talk about several times. So this is a very nice overlapping graph that shows these are our prior beliefs, whatever we believed in before, and this is science, and we only see this part of the science that conforms with our own beliefs. So anything that's lying outside the realm of our beliefs, we tend to say it is not true. And I believe that all of us are victim to this. So confirmation bias, I call it a scientist's biggest enemy. And some challenges and barriers I'll go into. We do suffer, especially as doctors and as patients, from what's called a most favorable opinion syndrome. If someone gives us a very good prognosis or a very good opinion about a condition, we tend to follow that. And before the pandemic came to India, we all saw what happened with Indians are different rhetoric. There were people who said India is immune because we have so many other diseases and we are all naturally immune. We thought diseases of China will not come to India. So that's So we know where that one went. And then we have, in 2020, we saw the in my experience attitude. When nobody knew how to treat COVID-19, people were throwing everything at it. So everybody was convinced whatever they were doing was right. So that is the in my experience attitude. Again, very, very dangerous. And then now we have the boosters that are coming in now. When vaccines came in, they were a good thing because they stopped people from dying. That's great. But then when more and more doses came in, the boundary between science and business got blurred. So now people are going into what is called the no harm giving it. Let's say no harm in giving it. So no harm giving it is not a scientific approach at all. Either you say yes or no, you must have a rationale for it. So I'll take you through a very interesting example of bias. There are about 50 different types of bias. I don't even pretend to know half of them. I've just outlined one or two. Confirmation bias I mentioned, and ascertainment bias is another one. Now, what is ascertainment bias? When Omicron came to India, we all thought, hey, all these cases were all healthy people. They're not even admitted to the hospital. So all the media started saying Omicron is such a mild illness. Did we ever wonder why that was? Because we were testing people who were fit enough and young enough to travel and who were all obviously vaccinated and had been tested. And they all belong to one particular socioeconomic category. They belong to the upper socioeconomic category, who were perhaps more educated, and they were all vaccinated. So when they picked up Omicron, all the cases had to be mild or asymptomatic because you were testing people who were just traveled. So by default, we're going to have a sampling or a cluster of people who are mild or asymptomatic. So with that, people concluded that Omicron was asymptomatic or milder. So I often use in my talks, I use this example. You could use this as well when you teach residents or medical students. Suppose we do a survey on the food preference of Indians. And suppose I choose to go outside an Udupi vegetarian restaurant. I stand outside there and then I survey all the people coming in to take food. And I ask them, what kind of food, sir or madam, would you prefer, vegetarian or non-vegetarian? Chances are 90% of my clientele are going to say they prefer vegetarian food. So I come to the conclusion that 90% of India prefers vegetarian food, which is completely wrong. That's because I chose the wrong sampling method. I left out many people who should have been included in the sample by choosing the wrong method. The same analogy that I used with Omicron. So that is called ascertainment bias. Credibility is something that I value the most, and if there is one virtue I strive for, this one, credibility is it. It is, and I'll just leave it there as a single word. And I will not take you through the details of how I try to achieve that, but this is one of those. I am constantly willing to accept that what I'm saying is wrong, and this is something this is a message that I occasionally send to a few trusted friends of mine. Ibi is one of the finest doctors. He belongs to Trivandrum. He's a neonatologist based at Sunrise Hospital. And this is my message to him just a few days ago. This is to Dr. Arvind. So I asked him the following. Hang on a minute. Please message me directly if you hear about any healthcare worker developing severe COVID-19 after full vaccination. Why would I not wait for Lancet to publish it? Because everything that is truth does not really come in Lancet. So we must really do what's called grassroots level data collection, talk to people of all genres, especially in a fast moving situation like the pandemic. We can't rely on articles that are published by accomplished scientists or journalists. We can't. So about 30% of my pandemic time goes in stuff like this. And I believe it helps me. It keeps me grounded. And I look for what is called signals. I look for signals. We don't want noise, but we want signals. Signals are true signals or true data, true bits of information that could change the future. For example, South Africa, there was a signal from South Africa from Penny Moore and Co. or Julio D. Oliveira. They were the ones who sent out a signal. Hey, there is something going on in South Africa in Gauteng province. That's where the story of Omicron started. So we look for signals. And this is our Tuesday COVID meetings. We've been running it for 2 years. I've been chairing it. And this is from last week. We had Dr. Shashank Joshi join us from Mumbai. And there are so many things we do to keep in touch with the reality. This meeting is a meeting of like-minded people. Like I hold it like a coffee table meeting. There is no senior, there is no junior. Everybody is equal. We sit around like friends around a table and talk. So we do a lot of brainstorming. We've sent out plenty of publications, not only to the doctors, but also to policymakers and media. And this is, again, one of the methods that we use to stay grounded so everybody benefits from each other's knowledge and experience. The flow of scientific knowledge, it goes in this direction. Doctors know most about science. Our knowledge must go to policymakers, to media, and to the general public. All of us have a role in it. And but when this flow, if you stop this flow, one might wonder what's wrong with that. Let somebody else do the work. Right? If the policy makers talk to them, media talk to the general public. You know where the problem is? The problem is that space gets filled by the fraudsters. Now, we did a very, very fine job in keeping the fraudsters at bay for the past 2 years. Anytime they put anything out, whether they belong to modern medicine or otherwise, trust me, there were modern medicine doctors who behaved like fraudsters. Now, we were severe on them. We clamped down severely on them. And eventually, people figured out, because whatever we said came true, people trusted us. So the public in Kerala at least trusts the doctors on that. Right. So fraudsters, by default, they have better communication skills. Whatever they say, it's more believable. So that is the problem with fraudsters. So if doctors fail to do this, if we just stick to what we do and we fail to communicate to the public, then fraudsters will fill that gap. And I honestly believe that. And Mark Twain, I believe it is Mark Twain who said this. You've probably seen my article on hoaxes. I wrote that 5 years ago. The science about hoaxes, how fake news spreads. My article opens with this line: a lie can travel halfway around the world while truth is putting on its shoes. We saw that just yesterday. And I don't counter all the lies, and because some, like we just won the cricket match in South Africa. When you play cricket, I'm not a very good cricketer. In fact, I'm not a good batsman either. But we know from cricket that if a bad bouncer comes at you, you're better off leaving it alone than trying to hook it. Because if you try to hook it, you'll get out. So likewise, if there is some bad news, some fake news, we tend to leave alone. But there are some that you need to play. You have to play the ball. So this is one such fake news. It came yesterday. I'm sure all of you have seen this a million times yesterday in your WhatsApp group. He is a top doctor of Israel, MD. Just go through his tweet. And this is, in fact, somebody called Vinay Kumar from Delhi. No, it's not this doctor's fault. This doctor is not from Israel. He may have roots in Israel, but he is a heart specialist he's a private practitioner in Los Angeles. I mean, he's been writing stuff on his Twitter handle. It is not his fault. Anybody can write anything nowadays. But the problem is somebody copied it and then started it. And so I went back and looked at his Twitter handle and I found some very interesting stuff. He said you could have 2 million cases of Omicron daily, all mild, no worries, no closures. Don't let them scare you. And the pandemic is a blessing, very spiritual approach to it. So I ended up having to send this to counter it because, as I said, somebody has to do it. So I'm not going to read this out for you. You probably saw it. I didn't put it in the ISG group because I think my ISG group was overloaded. So we have to do stuff like that. We just have to get out there and counter these fake news, because otherwise, what's the problem with the news like this? If people start believing what this guy said and say that this is the end of the virus and Omicron is going to vaccinate the world free, people are going to just move around in groups and have parties. And they're saying, let Omicron come. Right now, UK and US are in severe crisis because of this Omicron. So, which is again the danger of having these fake news. And then there's a problem in India that, especially among seniors, they believe that if it is printed, it must be true. And that's one of the reasons why older people tend to believe WhatsApp messages and Facebook messages, because they say it came in print, because they grew up in an era when everything that was printed used to be true because there was an editorial board. Now, none of these things have an editorial board. Half of social media or the digital media, they don't have any editorial boards. The newspapers perhaps have it, but beyond that, there is no editorial board. But now they probably haven't realized that the society has moved on. So if it is printed, it must be true, no longer is true. And then this is a 2021 reloaded version. If it is in the Lancet, it must be true. Now I hear that often by clueless politicians who sit and try to talk in panels and they try to evoke Lancet. So again, it's wrong. If Lancet is a journal and anybody can publish it, and just because it's published doesn't make it true. This is some good news that came today. There were three brilliant papers that came out today, and this is one man you want to follow. His name is Alessandro Setti, and that's Alessandro Setti there. Alessandro Setti and his team, and also Professor Shane Crotty, Albert Graffoni, all these are the top people in the world who study immunology. These are people who do it for a living, and they are good at what they do. What they've basically shown is that the T cells, they do not wane, and they actually protect us. And I'll just take you through a little bit of immunology. Harish, how much time do I have left? Harish? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. How much time do I have?
You can take your time. We have maybe
10 minutes. 10 minutes?
But there's some audio issue I wanted to check with you. In between there's some disturbance coming in your headphone.
Is that right? Okay. If there's any issue, just call me on my phone. Okay. So you can see the whiteboard?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's important that we discuss today's papers, but before that, let me take you through some very basic immunology here. So here's a cell. Suppose this is a SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, SARS-CoV-2 virus needs to get through what is called the ACE2 receptor to get into the cell. It uses the spike protein. So its target is to enter the cell. Now, neutralizing antibodies, what they do is they go and block off the spike protein. So the virus is unable to enter the cell. So neutralizing antibodies will stop the virus from entering the cell. So that is the NABs. Now, suppose the virus still is able to enter the cell. So this virus has entered the cell. Now, once the virus enters the cell, it is actively multiplying, right? It's multiplying millions of copies inside the cell. And it's also out of limits of the neutralizing antibody. See, antibody can't come and hit it. You can't. So the virus inside neutralizing antibody is not able to do anything at all. So neutralizing antibodies have gone away. So what the body can then do is, as the virus parts are being assembled, what it will do is, the body has what is called the major histocompatibility complex, MHC1 molecules. The body detects these virus particles and they sense these particles and displays them on MHC1 molecules. So here's another MHC1 molecule. So this is basically the body's cry for, the cell is sending out an alarm. As soon as the alarm is heard, we have the policemen come in. These are the CD8 or the cytotoxic cells. They come here and they have receptors which can recognize this, the virus's components, because they've already been trained by our vaccination. So what they do is they come and just kill off this cell. The cell is killed off along with its components. The cell can kill in one way, in two ways. One, it can go by suicide or apoptosis, or it can be destroyed. The cell is destroyed, there is inflammation. And if the cell undergoes suicide, it's a very organized process. It is quiet. So when there's a lot of cells that are being destroyed, you get inflammation, which is why even people who are vaccinated, they tend to get plenty of symptoms, but they don't get sick. So it is the CD8 cells that really help us. And along with CD8 cells, There are CD4 cells, which are helper cells, which in turn help our B cells. And after all this is done, once the infection is cleared, some of them retire and they go into what is called memory cells. Now, so there are memory B cells, and then there are memory T cells. And these cells live forever in multiple areas. They live in the bone marrow, they live in the blood, and they live in tissue. For example, they can live in your lungs or they can live in your nose. And when the infection strikes again, we are no longer caught unaware. They kick back into action very fast, and they recreate the scene in about 4 or 5 days, which is why people who are vaccinated generally do not die. Which is why if you receive 2 doses of vaccine, you're guaranteed to have these memory cells for the rest of your life, unless you're profoundly unlucky. Some people are unlucky in that they have, because remember, all of us have different MHC1. There may be individual variation between people, but for the most part, we've known that the T cell studies have shown that all the T cells are intact. No matter how many variations the virus makes, the T cells cannot be fooled. So that is a summary from today. So that's a bit of good news from Alessandro Setti and team. So let me just go forward a little bit here. So this is called the tale of 2 walls. This is Immunology Simplified. This is again something that I created. If somebody is vaccinated, immediately after the second dose, there's a big wall of neutralizing antibodies that's circulating, and this only lasts about 10 weeks. Neutralizing antibodies, as I showed earlier, are antibodies that go and they're like glued to a key. If you have a key and you put super glue on the key, then the key can't open the lock. It's pretty much neutralizing antibodies work like that. So after the second dose for about 10 weeks, you get a high level of neutralizing antibodies, which invariably it will come down in 10 weeks' time. And then this is after about 6 months, the NAB wall has come down. See, the virus can leap over. You can get a bit of an infection, but your second wall, which is your T cells and your memory cells, is unchanged. If you're unvaccinated, there is no first wall to start with, and younger people are able to build this wall fast, the second wall, the T cell wall. But the older a person gets, the construction gets a little bit frayed and it doesn't come up so quickly. So this is young, like 20, and this is old, like 85. So the second wall might not be constructed fast enough. So that is, again, one of the reasons why there's an age gradient. This is a graph from today. Again, I just put it on my Twitter just before my talk. Down to earth, I call it. The booster effect lasts exactly 10 weeks, which I think I circulated that video from Dr. Chin Hong from University of California. 10 weeks is the duration of neutralizing antibodies. And this graph from Israel shows that this is a boosted group. The boosted group really comes down. The 2-dose group comes down. And at the end of 2 months, the 2-dose and 3-dose equals, they become equal. They equalize here. See, they're equalizing at this point onwards. So this total duration is about 2 months. Again, we know very well that high levels of vaccination will not prevent future waves. No surprises there. And this is, again, one of the big pictures, again, that shows that if you focus on this graph, this is the age gradient, different age groups, and these are a number of deaths that are counted, and the length of each color segment represents how many deaths happen in each age group. Now, if you see here, the brown line here, it is drawn for the 45 to 49 age group, and all the age groups less than 45 I have shown over here. Can you see the tiny red speck? Now, which is why it is very important to focus on fully vaccinating this segment of people than to go after children. We need to get vaccines out in descending order. India did very well with that, with prioritization. But again, this kind of big picture will help with planning. There's a Kerala data again that shows that 97% of deaths are over the age of 40. And in children, our death is 1 in 70,000 which is basically zero. And among the few children who died, many of them had severe neurological complications like cerebral palsy and so on. This is a Kerala situation right now where we stand. The bottom graphs are the vaccinated segment. This is the unvaccinated segment. The y-axis is the case rate, how many cases are happening. This is done through one of my Twitter friends. Vaccines are not benign products by any stretch of the imagination. So let me just take you through this. Okay. In September 2021, until September 2021, we were thinking of VITT or VITT, that is a thrombotic complication of adenovirus vector vaccines, to occur in women less than 60. In December 2021, that changed. The age range applies to all adults now. So that's an update. And the vaccines that are adenovirus vector are our own Covishield and J&J's vaccine. So remember, vaccines are not benign products, even though they are often portrayed to be like the vitamin pill. They are not benign products. The people who suffer complications suffer terribly. In our Tuesday meeting, we've analyzed papers and we've interviewed people who publish papers. We have our own papers from Kerala that have published on complications. The Aster Group from Cochin and the Spine Hospital in Vaikam, they published together a series of people who developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, and many of them required to be on a ventilator. Now, it's no fun for these people, while it's just a piece of statistic for the rest of us. So we must respect the fact that vaccines, like all other medicines, must be used diligently with what I call the minimum effective dose principle. That's just my belief. No more than absolutely necessary. That's my principle. So I'll end with this. My summary is as follows. 1, COVID-19, you can call it whatever you want. You can give it all the fancy names, but at the end of the day, it is essentially a new cyclical viral disease. Second, this is not a vaccine preventable disease like polio or measles. There is no herd immunity. That's absolutely the wrong narrative. Number 4, public health measures are the solution, whether we like it or not. As we know, science is inconvenient. It does not wait for our comfort. There are no magic pills. Antivirals that are coming in are of marginal benefit. If you look at the absolute risk reduction, is marginal, and that drug molnupiravir was only studied in unvaccinated individuals, which meant that that study was geared for success. Now, this trial, that makers would not even dare to try it in vaccinated people. I believe that they're trying the drug out on vaccinated people, and if in unvaccinated people the difference was 30%, I don't know what the benefit in vaccinated people will be. Molnupiravir, again, I don't mean to be pessimistic. I'm just telling you the facts. There are no magic pills for this virus. Vaccines, 2 doses. They protect long-term against severe disease. If one fact has emerged in the past 12 months, this is the fact. We can believe that. The minimum effective dose principle, not only for vaccines, but for all medications and other interventions that we use, is a good principle to keep in mind. And to me, with all my reading, there are 2 comorbidities. The first is age, and the other is an unvaccinated status. Everything else is an ornament. It comes attached with age. Age and being unvaccinated. The age is something we can't change, but being unvaccinated is a status that we can change. So with that, I'll stop. I think I'm about 3 minutes over time. Thank you.